along that 9 meters lives trillions of bacteria. And these little guys are incredibly powerful. They're doing things like regulating our hormones, impacting our mental health, our appetite, so many factors. So we need to look after them.
Happy New Year, self-obsessed girlies, and welcome back to the podcast. It's officially 2025. We are all in our level up era, trying to become the best version of ourselves. So what a better way to do that than kick off with a brand new self-obsessed podcast episode. Today, we're going to be talking all things gut health. Now, I feel like social media always loves to talk about having the perfect body type, but I've been a big believer for a long time that once you take a look at what's on the inside and fix what's going on there, that's truly where all of the magic lies. Gut health is super important, and a lot of people talk about it from a digestion perspective, but the truth is it's actually linked into a lot of different things, some of which being your mental health and your skin. So there's a lot to look into here that could be showing up or affecting your life and you're not even aware of it. And for that reason, I'm actually joined by a very special expert today. Her name is Dr. Megan Rossi, and she's an award-winning scientist, nutritionist, dietitian, and author of a best-selling book called Eat More, Live Well. And today we're going to be discussing all things what actually is gut health, what does social media say it is versus what actually is it, what practical steps can we use to actually improve ours, what are all of the signs we need to look at to discover whether we have good gut health versus bad gut health, what are the causes of that, and so much more to answer all of your burning questions, because in true self-obsessed fashion, you are not going to leave this episode and be confused about anything on this topic, I promise you. Before we get straight into it, be sure to check out all of the links below. You can check out what I'm doing on social media, my new newsletter, and my YouTube, and you can also check out all of Dr. Megan Rossi's links below, including her book. And right before we start, I'd like to give a big thank you to Shopify for sponsoring this episode. Hello, Megan, and welcome to the podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure, Tam.
I'm so excited to talk to you. I can't wait to learn all things gut health. It's definitely something I've looked into a while ago, but I still feel like there's a bit of confusion because a lot of people have different opinions.
There's a lot of mixed messages on social media, right? Which is why I got into social media as a scientist, because there's this huge disconnect. But the thing about gut health, as you've mentioned, it is incredibly powerful. It is a landmark scientific discovery that essentially changes what it means to be human. So I want everyone to feel really empowered with practical things they can do to start tapping into this, scientific discovery.
Amazing. So could you start us off with what actually is gut health in simple terms, but in detail, other than, I need to have a healthy gut?
Very good question, right? So gut health relates to this 9-meter long tube that we all have that delivers food from entry all the way to exit. So that 9 meters is gut health. And I think that 9 meters is incredibly important for 3 key reasons, right? You touch on digestion. That's an obvious one. We've known that for ages. If you don't have a good gut lining, no matter how healthy the food you put into your body is, it can't get from your gut into your blood to feed your brain, your skin, all that sort of stuff, right? The second one is that 70% of our immune system lives in the gut along that 9 meters. Right? So we know that people with better gut health have a stronger and more resilient immune system as well. But it's this third element, and that's what I did my PhD in, and I think has brought the fame to this area of gut health. And that's the fact that, again, along that 9 meters lives trillions of bacteria. And these little guys are incredibly powerful. They're doing things like regulating our hormones, impacting our mental health, our appetite, so many factors. So we need to look after them.
So if somebody's listening to this right now and they're like, okay, I know what gut health is, how do I know if I have good gut health or bad gut health? What are kind of the signs that you could tell them right now and they're like, okay, I think that's where I lie on the spectrum?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question because we have tests for our kidney function, our heart function, right? You go to the doctor and you get a simple test. But because gut health is not only so new, but it's so broad because it's literally impacting every single organ in our body, there is no single test yet, right? But, there are some obvious signs. And when I was writing my first book, I developed this 10-question assessment. We can add it to the link, completely free to complete it. And what I do is ask people 10 questions and helps you scale your gut health from 0 to 20. So you've got a better idea of kind of where it lays. So some of the questions is, firstly, yes, do you get digestive symptoms? But also, how stressed are you? How often do you get sick? Are you on a restrictive diet? And those sort of factors, which we know also can start to impact our gut health. Because as you alluded to, it's not just, digestive symptoms. People with poor mental health, actually their gut may have a role in that.
Yeah, interesting. And so would bloating be one of the signs as well? Bloating after meals, feeling tired after meals?
Absolutely. Those sorts of things, struggling with sleeping, like I said, poor mental health. It might be things like you're struggling with weight management. There's so many factors. And that's why when anyone comes to see me in clinic, I always, do this checklist and see, okay, well, what area could you have some weaknesses? Let's focus on your gut for, 2 to 3 months and then see whether that improves those other areas, whether it's things like, your fatigue, your energy levels, your weight management, that mental health, your hormone regulation, those sorts of things. And, the research really does support that it can have really meaningful results in those areas.
Okay. And would inflammation be kind of one of the signs as well? I know that's a big buzzword on social media at the moment, but what does that actually mean and include?
Yeah, another good one. So inflammation is when, a little bit of inflammation is actually really healthy. It's our body's way to kind of protect itself.
Okay.
But if we have ongoing levels of this kind of small inflammation because maybe we've got a bit of a leaky gut or, we're not getting that sleep. And if we're not getting that sleep, we kind of don't get time to rest the body. Then our body produces these things called inflammatory markers and they increase and they cause havoc throughout the rest of our body, which can then, further impact poor mental health, the way all of those sorts of factors. So one of the ways these little amazing creatures within our gut can really support our overall health is by reducing the inflammation. So impacting the inflammatory levels by being antioxidants in a way.
Okay. And when we talk about inflammation as well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, this is what I've seen and what I know so far. Would that link into, for women, their period, their menstrual cycle, maybe kind of increasing menstrual pain on their cycle as well if they have high inflammation? And then does that go back to gut health?
Yeah, there's so many factors exactly that link to inflammation or that have a negative impact as a consequence of increased inflammation. And, there's some really cool studies out there which shows that, women who have, heavier periods or more painful periods, if they start to include olive oil, extra virgin olive oil in their diet every day, as well as at least 2 pieces of fruit, they've been associated with, lighter periods and less period pain. So again, these sorts of foods, which I'm sure we'll talk about, actually really nourish those trillions of bacteria. So that's one way in which these microbes eat these foods and then can produce these chemicals which help reduce that inflammation in the body, which can help with things like your periods.
That makes sense. I had a friend and she had said that she had the most painful periods. Like she would actually throw up because her periods were that intense. And she said she couldn't live her normal life because of it. As soon as she started drinking green juice, her period pains completely went away. She never felt nauseous again. So it's so interesting that there could be such a simple fix with the food that you consume that could literally make your life easier, right?
Absolutely. And again, it's coming back to being empowered with, what we should be doing, how we can make these small switches in our diet that doesn't cost the earth.
Yeah. Hey guys, and thank you so much for listening so far. I wanted to take a quick little break to tell you about an exciting project of mine that's just come out. If you didn't know, I recently launched my new business. It's called the Self-Obsessed Journal. That's right, and it's inspired from the podcast. So I thought, what better way to tell you all? I actually just recently launched my guided journal. It is available to order via the link below in the description. I've been so passionate about releasing a journal for over a year now, and I was always trying to wait for the right time to do it, having such a busy schedule, doing the podcast, doing YouTube, all of these things. I really wanted to make sure that I'd be able to manage it and pour my whole heart into it. And that's exactly why I wanted to choose Shopify as the commerce platform to have my website on. The reason I always go back to Shopify when I'm setting something up, e.g. running my newsletter or the jewelry business that I've had in the past, is because of all the tools they have integrated into the platform to make running your business easier than ever. And I'm not even just talking about the actual Shopify tools like your drag and drop editor and everything you can do to kind of integrate your social media, but also all of the Shopify apps and add-ons you can add onto your website to just manage everything in one place. On top of that, they've now introduced Shopify Magic, which is how they've integrated AI into the platform. But like I mentioned before, I have to say my absolute favorite is Shopify App Store, and the fact that there are over 8,000 apps that you can use to integrate into your business to serve your unique needs. I actually highly recommend that you guys just sign up to Shopify, have a little explore, use the tools on there. You never know where it might take you and how it might inspire you. To get the free trial, you can click the link below in my description. That's shopify.com/self-obsessed. Again, that's shopify.com/SELF OBSESSED. Thank you so much for staying here for this quick break. Now, right back into the episode. I would love to play a little game with you quickly. So this is going to be a quick fire. So we know, and you've spoken about this in the past, on social media kind of coming up with these quick fixes to having good gut health. And you have debunked them in the past. And I see these quick fixes all the time on social media. And I too, like everybody else, I'm super kind of curious to see, if I order this little thing on Amazon, am I going to be my healthiest self? So I'll say each of these kind of trendy things, and then you tell me what your opinion is on it and why. Okay. So number one is taking a shot of apple cider vinegar in the morning.
Not a whole lot of evidence for it.
Okay.
If you enjoy it and it kind of starts your day in a like, I'm going to be healthy, I'm going to have extra plants today, then go for it. But actually, there's not a lot of scientific evidence that that's going to improve your gut health. And in fact, your dentist won't like it because it can be quite acidic on the teeth, right? So you need to make sure you be cautious of the effects on your teeth.
Speaking of that one, actually, before I go on to the next, I feel like some people take it as a way of lining the gut, but I've also seen other people take olive oil to line the gut first thing in the morning, which you just mentioned. So would you say maybe that's a better alternative?
Yeah, I would say it doesn't necessarily line the gut, but we do know olive oil, up to 60 mils a day is actually really beneficial because of those antioxidants which feed the microbes. So absolutely having some olive oil to start the day, I think is a great switch.
Okay.
But yeah, it comes down to the individual, right?
Amazing. Okay, next one is chlorophyll water, chlorophyll supplements.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't recommend them. Yeah, so a lot of myths online are suggesting that they can help with IBS. But the thing is, for a lot of people, it can actually cause diarrhea. And that can aggravate IBS and cause a little bit of unsettlement in the gut. So I wouldn't typically recommend broadly that people take chlorophyll.
So the next one is greens powder. These powdered greens, you froth them up in your glass of water. Everybody's drinking them.
Yeah, look. If you struggle with bloating in particular, actually I discourage them because they contain these types of plant chemicals, which for a lot of people can be beneficial. But if you're bloating, essentially, you typically have a sensitive digestive tract. And if you add a lot of these types of plant chemicals all at once, like in these concentrated green juices, that can actually aggravate bloating. So it is crazy again to see on social, they'll say green juice is best for bloating. And I'm like, no, we've done clinical trials at King's College in London, and we know it actually causes bloating. So being cautious of them. Now, for everyone else, if you've got no issues with bloating and you want to have a little bit of a few scoops, then go for it. But what I would say is it is not a substitute for whole plants. And in clinics, I often see people taking these and thinking, sweet, I've ticked all my plants for the week. I don't need to take any. But the thing is, when you go through the processing to make these refined green powders, a lot of those antioxidant chemicals which feed the bacteria are broken down and kind of ruined. So you don't actually get that full potential.
Do you think that somebody blending up all of their green veggies and fruits in a juicer or a blender and then drinking that is a better alternative, or is it about the same? Because doesn't it strip fiber?
No, so that's a really good one to debunk. So actually blending fiber, fiber source at home is completely fine. So I'm a big fan of smoothies. So juice essentially takes out the fiber and dumps the fiber, and you don't feed the bacteria, right? Because fiber is like a fertilizer for the microbiome. So you want the fiber. Okay. Whereas a smoothie, you put the whole carrot in, a whole orange in instead of just the juice, and actually you get the fiber. So even though it blends it down, home blenders aren't strong enough to completely break down those fibers. So you still get that fiber benefit. So I'm a big fan of making your own smoothies at home.
Yay, because I do green juicing every morning, and I was like, I wasn't too sure. The last one for the quick fire is taking supplements. So I know that you've said previously that taking your prebiotics is great for the gut health. What if somebody isn't getting it from the foods they eat, so like kimchi, I'm sure kefir is one as well, and they're just taking a probiotic supplement?
A really good one. So I'm so passionate about probiotics because I did my PhD in that space. So probiotics essentially is a live bacteria. So probiotic, whereas prebiotic, pre-biotic, literally one letter difference, which is so confusing for people, is very different. So prebiotics is the fertilizer. Most of them are fibers, and probiotics is a live bacteria. So generally speaking, most people can get enough of their prebiotics if they're eating a nice diverse range of plants in their diet, right? Whereas the probiotics, these are kind of like more of the capsule supplement types. Essentially, we've just been using them incorrectly. So there is absolutely no science to say you should take a general probiotic every day for your gut health. you just don't do that. But some probiotics can be really beneficial. It's kind of like vitamins and minerals. So you wouldn't take an iron supplement to treat your vitamin D deficiency, would you? Because iron and vitamin D are different. You make sure you take the right one. That's literally how we need to use probiotics. You need to take the right strain, which is a name of the bacteria, at the right time in the right way.
Okay.
So an example of that is there's really good evidence that if you've got bacterial vaginosis or thrush, so your vaginal microbiome is changing, because yes, we've got millions of bacteria that live in there too, then actually taking a specific combination of bacteria, and it's called LA14 and HNO01 with lactoferrin, actually can really help reduce your risk of recurrence and help you get through that a lot faster.
Interesting. I've also heard of postbiotics.
Yeah, another P word just to confuse everyone, right? So postbiotics essentially is the chemicals the bacteria make.
Okay.
So the hypothesis is that let's not even worry about the probiotics or the prebiotics. Let's just get the chemicals the bacteria produce, because they're the ones that start to impact things like our mental health, and you reduce that inflammation. So it sounds good in theory, but sadly, when you just take a postbiotic, it doesn't reach the part of the gut to get absorbed that it needs to. So at the moment, I'm very much of a case of you need to take, the specific probiotic or get the fermented foods if you don't have any specific indications, and get the prebiotics. And maybe in the future, postbiotics will have more science behind them.
Okay.
But for now, I'd say save your money.
Everybody is all about that hydration recently, so a lot of people are now drinking electrolytes. What do you think about this? At first, I was like, I wasn't too sure about it. Everybody's coming up with an electrolyte drink brand. I've heard some people say it's really only beneficial for people who work out a lot.
Yeah, look, the electrolyte drinks, essentially, it just helps you absorb the water more effectively, right? So if you're sweating loads, the thing about a lot of the electrolyte drinks is they contain added sugars.
Yeah.
And we're already having way too many added sugars. So I definitely don't think, unless you're an athlete or sweating a lot, like, outside, I'm Australian, so the builders outside, sweating all day, then they need to take electrolytes. Okay. But for the average person, I wouldn't be adding extra salt, which is what these electrolytes also include, and added sugars in my diet unnecessarily.
So you've touched on mental health very briefly throughout this episode, and I actually had no idea that the gut could be linked to it. And I've also heard that, and I might have this wrong, it's either that the gut is linked to our nervous system or it acts as its own kind of secondary nervous system.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's this really exciting area of research called the gut-brain axis, right? So there's this two-way communication that's occurring between the gut and the brain. And one of those ways is through what we call the enteric nervous system. So just its own kind of secondary nervous system. So it is fascinating research. And, as a clinician and scientist, it's now given me kind of the empowerment to say to people who are struggling with their mental health, look, let's focus on your gut health through improving your diet, i.e. adding more different types of plants in your diet, things like oily fish, omega-3s, fermented dairy, these sorts of things. Because we've got the clinical studies out there showing that it can have meaningful impacts on people's mental health. So I hope that anyone listening to this who might be struggling with their mental health, it empowers them to start to think, okay, well, actually, you know what? If I start to nourish this little community of these microbes with the food that they want, I can have, an improvement in my mental health. Now, of course, mental health is so heterogeneous, right? So, if you need to go on medications, absolutely go on them. But one of the clinical trials, if there's any nerds out there, check out the SMILES trial, one of my favorite studies. And what they did is tested this, right? So everyone was on antidepressants, they had moderate severe depression. Half of them got into befriending counselling. The other half got a gut-boosting diet. 12 weeks on each group. And the control group, the befriending counselling, was to make sure any benefit in the diet group wasn't just because they were seeing a dietitian, but actually because of the food, right? So nicely controlled. And in the diet group, so the gut boosting diet group, 32% of them had a significant improvement in their depression scores, which would have classified them as no longer clinically depressed. So it had meaningful impacts. Everyone did stay on their antidepressants. So again, it's a case I would never recommend people would go cold turkey, on their medications for a diet. But certainly what I've seen, my own clinic with the support of the prescribing medic, if someone's wanted to come off their antidepressants, a lot, not all, a lot have via targeting their gut through the right nutrition.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah.
On the topic of mental health as well, we know that, to aid our mental health in the best way, we should be exercising, we should be drinking our water, being under sunlight, getting fresh air, all of these things, and sleeping well. And you've mentioned before as well that sleeping well can also sleeping well or unwell, could impact our gut health. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, again, it's another bi-directional relationship, right? So if our gut health isn't great, our sleep often is impacted. But also if our sleep is impacted, our gut health isn't great. So they affect each other. And I think it is really important that people start to, think about what is impacting their sleep. Where, in my first book, some of my colleagues did this clinical trial where they did this sleep hygiene protocol and they shared it with me. And some of the tips that I've got in there is things like, 2 hours before bed, jot down all your thoughts, have a worry diary, right? As soon as you wake up, expose your face to light. There's all these little tips and tricks that can really improve the quality of your sleep.
Yeah.
Which in turn will improve those microbes and enable them essentially to work really hard for you.
Yeah, it can be so easy to kind of get confused about, I need to fit in all of these different food groups and things like that. So just knowing that, if I get the right amount of sleep, if I have a good evening and morning routine, then that can really, really help. But speaking of food groups, I know that you've said previously that cutting out certain food groups are not the answer, despite what people on social media say. And before we fully dive into that, I'd love to know your opinion on sugar. I've seen a lot of people talk about how beneficial it is. I cut out sugar for 2 weeks. I don't eat sugar whatsoever. I cut out refined sugars. Do you think that that's the answer? And how does it impact our gut health?
Yeah, so the first thing to keep in mind is that sugar, like table sugar, gets absorbed really high up that 9 meters, right? So actually it doesn't really reach where the bulk of the bacteria live, which is in the final 1.5 meters. So actually sugar directly is not like a toxin for the bacteria. It's not like harming them. But the thing is, most of us are having too much of what we call added sugars. So there's 2 categories. And I think this is where people miss the nuances of nutrition on social media. And then everyone's fearful of sugar. But the sugar that's found in whole fruits, the blueberries, your apples, your pears, actually is completely fine. We don't need to restrict that. And the reason for that is that sugar is encapsulated with fiber and other antioxidant things called phytochemicals. So essentially, that sugar is not doing any harm because there's so much benefit when you have that because of all those other chemicals which feed the gut bacteria.
Yeah.
So I never, ever recommend that people need to cut out the whole sources of, sugar, i.e. the fruit. But then there is, like you said, what we call the added sugar or the refined sugar. But that includes things like your honey, your agave nectar, your coconut sugar, which has got this health halo around it. But essentially we are having too much of them. And that means not that it's a direct toxin, we're filling up on these added sugars and therefore we're not, having enough calories left in our diet to eat these antioxidant foods, the plant foods, right? So it's more of a negative impact because we're missing out on so much goodness.
And what would you say about carbs as well? Because I've seen the rise in popularity on eating kind of the same meal every single day, meat, some veggies, probably an avocado. That's it. No carbs.
Yeah. So again, coming down to the nuances, we know that fiber, which again, that's a fertilizer of the microbiome, is actually a carbohydrate, is a carb, right?
Yeah.
So when people say no carbs, it's like, well, what types of carbs are we talking?
Okay.
Are you cutting out all your plant sources or are you talking about you're cutting out things like white rice, white bread? Now, you certainly don't need to cut out those white pasta, white bread, but they're not having an additional benefit on your microbiome.
Okay.
What I always say is make the switch. Things like your quinoa and your barley and your other whole grains. The science shows that having these in your diet actually increases the diversity of your microbiome. And that therefore reduces risk of type 2 diabetes, improves mental health. Weight management even has been linked with these whole grains because these microbes thrive on it. And I guess a concept which is really important when we think about gut health is plant diversity. So if you're just eating, your cauliflower and your broccoli and that's it, like you're having the same meal on repeat, you're missing out on, it only fertilizes a couple of microbes. And the microbes that the quinoa and the blueberries and all those other plants die off.
Okay.
And therefore you miss all the skills that they've got. So some of these blueberry-liking ones might actually be really good for hormone regulation. So if you're narrowing down your diet and not getting diversity, you're really not getting that diverse range of microbes, which are like superpowers within you.
Speaking of having a diverse diet, what about our viewers who might be vegan or vegetarian? Would you have any tips for them? Are they kind of losing out on that helpful bacteria because they don't eat meat?
Yeah, so not necessarily. So you can have amazing gut health whether you eat animal foods or not, right? But what I would say, if you are vegan, i.e. 100% plant-based, then I would recommend you take an omega-3 supplement because our microbes really do love, the omega-3, which comes from all that oily fish in particular is the best sources. You get some plant sources of omega-3, but it's not necessarily the right form of omega-3 that our microbes love.
Yeah.
So you can take some algae oil supplements if you are 100% plants only. In terms if you're, a vegetarian, you again can have really good gut health. Pescatarian can even be better if you're adding in some animal foods in terms of fish.
I would also love to know your opinion on drinking coffee. I've always known, obviously it's not the best thing to have every single day. There are some people that drink it 3 to 5 times a day. I was always kind of an occasional drinker, and then I got scared because I listened to a podcast episode kind of by another medical professional who basically said that coffee is really, really bad for you. The best thing you can do for yourself is to switch it out, maybe drink matcha or green tea, something like that. Would you completely agree?
I would absolutely not agree necessarily,
wow.
right? So I'd be interested to know who that medical professional was.
I can't even remember.
But I think that's one of the other things on social is, just because you've got a medical degree doesn't mean you know anything about nutrition. So my husband's actually a GP, so nothing against medics. I love medics, right? But they have about 3 days of nutrition training in their, 8 years of their degree, right? So they don't necessarily know the nuances of nutrition. Some of them do and they're amazing, but just kind of, I think we need to be aware of what are their exact qualifications when we're getting this information. So in terms of coffee, if you have gut issues or are an anxious person, then I would agree having decaf coffee is the best, right? So if we think of coffee, there's 2 key elements to it. One is the caffeine. Now, we know that caffeine, everyone, increases cortisol, the stress hormone.
Yes.
So if you're vulnerable, like I said, to anxiety or you've got gut issues, cortisol makes both of them worse, right? So that's why, you don't want that element. The other element of coffee is all of these polyphenols, these things which feed the microbiome, have anti-inflammatory impacts.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I say is if someone has a gut issue or are really anxious, then we want to take out the caffeine component because you don't want that cortisol spike. But you want some of the antioxidants. So actually having a decaf coffee is a good thing. Or, going through other options that don't naturally contain caffeine.
Okay.
For everyone else, actually, the science has shown that having, a couple of coffees a day, because of those polyphenols, not necessarily because of the caffeine, actually can have a benefit on your microbiome.
Wow.
Because it feeds them. It's a certain type of fertilizer we can't necessarily get from other types of drinks or foods. So it depends on what your background is, whether actually you should have coffee. But I would always be cautious on, anyone who's having a stressy day, you grab for the coffee, but that's probably going to increase your stress because of the cortisol.
Wow, coffee lovers listening right now, you've probably made their day. Another thing around coffee I've heard is it's probably best not to have it around your period because it can increase inflammation in the body. Is it myth or true?
I would say that's a myth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I've been depriving myself for no reason.
It's just like increasing your headaches.
Yes, literally.
During a time where you need to have that boost. So absolutely,
Honestly,
still have your coffee during your periods.
Wow. Speaking of drinking, would there be anything you could tell us about kind of the process of having a hangover, how certain people might try to leave that feeling, that headache? Some people's, answer is drinking coffee, drinking a Coke, and kind of balancing yourself up again.
I think the only evidence when it comes to helping with a hangover, essentially, the strong evidence is hydration, right?
Yes.
So we're so dehydrated and therefore we need that hydration. What I say, there's no clinical trials yet for it, but what I think mechanistically is actually kind of looking after your microbiome because they actually also talk to your liver.
Okay.
So there is this gut-liver axis, just like the gut-brain axis. There's literally an axis with everything with your gut. So actually, if you're going to, again, binge drinking is not great. We all know that. But if you're going to do it, what I recommend is that you kind of prepare your gut that day and maybe the day before by having a few extra plants.
Oh.
And in the morning, have something prepped the night before. Like I always make these smoky beans. We can add the recipe below, but I make them in bulk, like, once a month and always have portions in the freezer. So I defrost it if I'm going out and have some in the fridge ready to go because I think the next morning we're more vulnerable to having these ultra processed foods that kind of don't nourish the microbiome. And I think in the morning, because alcohol is not good for the microbiome, we need to kind of beg for forgiveness and say, I'm going to nourish you now. here's some really healthy food. So,
Yeah.
mixed beans is actually a really good source of these prebiotics that we spoke about.
Okay.
And also they're salty, so they kind of help with that hangover feel as well, and makes you a little bit more thirstier because of the salt, so you drink more water. So it kind of has that benefit as well.
That's so useful. So thank you for sharing. And I love that you are kind of all about balance and moderation rather than cut this and cut that and alcohol is bad for you, so you can't have it whatsoever. I think it's super helpful because it makes having a good gut health more realistic for everyone.
And because you don't need to be perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like you absolutely don't. And I think that's where people fall down, where they aim for perfection and then they can only last for 6 months, and then the next 4 years is awful. And that 4 years does so much more damage than, a little bit of treats here and there.
And it's like you said, you enter that vicious cycle of I should be doing this, or I'm not healthy enough yet, or I shouldn't have eaten, those sweets or whatever. And then you're stressing yourself out more. And it's just this horrible cycle. I would love if you could tell us a little bit more about the term mindful eating and kind of explain what that is for those of us who don't know.
Yeah, so it's a technique that's been out there for a very long time. But I think in today's society, when we're all so busy, we're all like multitasking and kind of celebrate that world, actually it's probably even more important that more people are aware of mindful eating. So essentially what it is just being very engaged with what you're eating. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm the first to put up my hand that, historically, certainly at uni, I would, be working an assignment or something, and I would eat a bowl of granola and be like, did I eat that? It's like empty all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Like you just mindlessly eat, right? And as a result, not only is your digestion on the back foot, so it doesn't properly digest it well, you can get gut symptoms, but also we tend to overconsume, right? So mindful eating technique, essentially it is where you engage all of your senses with what's in front of you. And I typically do this strategy in clinic when someone has a negative relationship with the food. So it might be chocolate, right? Where some people are like, I can't be around chocolate because I'll binge on it. So what I do is get them just to have one small Freddo Frog or one small piece, and do this mindfulness exercise where essentially you would look at it for a bit and be like, is there like little bumps on it? You really engage with it. And like, oh, what is that like? Is there a little defect on the back? Then you would smell it and be like, does that bring back any nostalgia of like maybe when you're a kid's birthday party, when you're younger, like thinking through that. And then you would put some just on your tongue and then start to like let your salivary glands, start to work through and start to be like, oh, is that reminding me of anything else? Is there textures there? So you do all of that. And actually you notice that you'll spend, 2 minutes doing this on this one bit of chocolate that you probably would have, eaten in 1 second. So it's really about engaging with your food.
Is that, I guess that links in a little bit into portion control then as well, because I guess you're so immersed in the experience of eating even a square of chocolate, then you're less likely to consume the whole thing out of not realizing what you're doing and then feeling like I actually didn't even want the entire chocolate bar anyway, right?
100%. Yeah, it's got so many different benefits. Whether weight management is your goal or whether it's about your gut issues, those sorts of things, like it can be so powerful, and I think everyone should start doing it.
Does that link a little bit into the term intuitive eating, or are they kind of the same thing?
100%. Yeah, the same thing. Is kind of, there's overlap where intuitive eating is when you listen to your body. Okay. So if you're generally hungry, you should eat. Don't starve yourself and be like, oh no, lunch is not for another hour. I can't eat. So that's more of intuitive eating. But, if you're good at mindful eating, intuitive eating kind of overlaps with that as well.
What you said there about people kind of saying, no, I need to wait until I eat, or I need to wait a few hours and things like that. And even linking this into intermittent fasting, where people will try and avoid eating like 4 or 5 hours. I mean, I'm guessing here that maybe that would wreak havoc on your gut health because I'm guessing it will increase your cortisol, right?
So many things, to think about here. So if we think of intermittent fasting, there's many different types, right? So somewhere like, for 2 days, you go really low calories and then eat what you want the other days. Others is time restricted eating. So you only eat between like 10 a.m. and maybe 5 p.m. and that sort of thing. And what I would say for people who are struggling with weight management, what I see in clinic is that reducing down your eating window can help people gain control of their weight to reach their happy weight, essentially. But there's no like kind of special mechanism. The only thing is it reduces down your eating window. What I would caution, as you've kind of highlighted, is that for a lot of people, they get into this really negative mindset around it. And they not only reduce their eating window down, which means they have to get all their fiber in that short period of time, and therefore they get gut symptoms, and they cut out these plants, and therefore actually it leads to, they might lose a little bit of weight, but actually their metabolism might get screwed up. So then when they start to reintroduce, they put on even more weight. So that there's a negative impact there. And then, like you said, there's a thing of hangry. Yeah. If you are so hungry, you get really grumpy, you're not nice to interact with, but then that also increases your stress hormones, and that's going to be another mechanism. So there's so many kind of watch outs. But again, I think it comes down to, because I never want to tell people what to do. I think it's about, different things can work for different people. It's worth being aware of the cautions and the risks, and then you decide whether that's right for you. But I would say for a lot of people, this kind of fasting approach is not going to lead to better gut health.
Same with juice cleansers, I'm guessing?
Absolutely. So the juice cleansers literally starves the microbiome, because remember, they love the fiber and actually, again, has all of these negative impacts. And a lot of people who go on juice fasts, they do come to me and say when they start to reintroduce, their gut's really sensitive and it can develop IBS that way. So if you're doing something in the short term, it feels good, just be cautious of the medium term impacts of these sorts of things.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing. We're actually going to move on to the final section of the podcast. Every episode and at the end of it, every single one of my YouTube videos, for those of you who are new here, we always have a homework section. And this is where we kind of sum up everything we've talked about into super practical and actionable steps, so that the people who are listening and are feeling inspired by everything we've talked about kind of have this action plan of, this is how I can start implementing all of this advice today. I would love to start off by talking about, let's say, because I know I would be doing this if I was watching the episode. To be fair, I'll probably go home and do this anyway. To watch the episode and get out a piece of paper and kind of write out, what food should I be fitting into my diet every single week that just ensure that I'm doing the best favor for myself? One thing I will add to this myself is I got into the habit a really long time ago of planning out my grocery list in accordance to good gut health foods and also what my intolerances are. So I just have the same list every single week. I organized it according to aisle in the supermarket. Pretty organized. So for this list, could you make some suggestions?
I love that you do that.
Thank you.
Because preparation literally is the key to
it makes it so easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Decisions happen at the supermarket, right? Because you can only eat what's in your cupboards at home.
That's it.
So in terms of the recommendations, I would say there's 2 tiers, right? So if people are very new to this, what I would say is aiming for getting something from the Super 6 plant-based food groups each day. So think Super 6 each day. Now, the Super 6 plant is your whole grains, things like your quinoa, your barley, your oats, things like that. Your veg, cauliflower, broccoli, your fruit, bananas, all those sorts of things. Your nuts and seeds.
Okay.
Your legumes, so things like your chickpeas and your butter beans, your kidney beans, and your herbs and your spices.
Interesting. I haven't heard herbs and spices before.
Yeah, they're full of those gut-loving phytochemicals. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, that's good to know.
Next tier, for those who are like, got the Super 6, all sorted, I would say is think about getting at least 30 different plants in a week.
30 a week. Okay, yeah.
Now, that can sound really daunting because you're like, oh my God, that sounds expensive. I've got to do a lot of prep.
Like everything from the veg aisle, basically.
But not necessarily. So those 30 plants come from the Super 6.
Okay.
So your legumes are included there, your mixed grains. So the way you can easily get 30 plus, like you can get 50 so easily, is just at the supermarket thinking diversity. So don't just ever buy your pumpkin seeds, get your 3 seed mix.
Yeah.
Don't just get your frozen blueberries, get your frozen mixed berries. And the same with your, the veggies. Don't just get the one broccoli, get the kind of the diverse pack, because each different type of plant will feed a different type of bacteria. And each bacteria, like you and I, have different skills. So people who've got the best gut health, the better mental health, better fitness, better focus, everything we all want, have a really diverse range of microbes.
That is so practical. I feel so inspired now. Next time I'm shopping, I'm like, okay, I know. Get the diverse like salad packs and things like that.
100%.
So easy. So those 2 tips are really, really helpful. One thing you didn't mention, which I hear all the time, is your Greek yogurt, your kimchi. Do you think that's necessary for everybody?
Not 100% necessary for everyone.
Oh.
What I would say is fermented foods, though, is an additional benefit.
Okay.
Now, I don't like to maybe that's a 3rd tier.
Okay.
Because when we talk about fermented foods, that's things like kimchi and sauerkraut, which are fermented types of vegetables. Then obviously your kefirs, your live yogurts, your kombuchas, all of that sort of stuff. Now, when it comes to fermented foods, it is often quite a acquired taste. And I don't want people to freak out and be like, I don't like fermented foods, therefore I'm never going to get good health. Because it's not necessary. But we do know there's some really good research from Stanford University, which shows that people who eat more fermented foods actually have lower markers of those inflammatory markers around their body, as well as a more diverse range of gut bacteria. So as a third tier, if you've nailed the Super 6, you've nailed the 30 plus plant points, I would then go, okay, let's get some fermented foods at least 2 to 3 times a day.
So now that we've spoken a little bit about the foods that we should be getting from the supermarket, what would you say a gut-friendly meal looks like? You know, everybody talks about having like blood sugar balanced meals and having a very colourful plate.
What I would say is trying to get the Super 6 on a plate if you can.
Wow.
Or it could be within the one meal, right? So you have your fruit at the end as like a bit of a dessert or something like that. So, you know, you've got your mixed grains in there, you've got your mixed beans, i.e. your legumes, you know, you sprinkle with some seeds, you might have, you know, a handful of nuts with your fruit at the end, some turmeric on there or some cinnamon, you know, to kind of flavour it, some garlic in there. It's, you know, quite easy. And then obviously some bag of veg, whether it's some steamed veg or it's, you know, a plate of lettuce, mixed lettuce and cabbage and things like that.
So a lot of boxes to tick. I was thinking I was doing great with my chicken and my broccoli and my sweet potato, but there's a lot more to include.
Room for improvement. That's a good start.
Okay.
But let's add in some of that plant diversity from the Super 6.
So for the viewers, if they're thinking, you know, we've spoken a little bit about supplements earlier on, maybe they're not taking any and they're thinking, okay, where do I even start? What do I buy? What would you recommend and why?
Look, I think generally for gut health, you don't need a supplement.
Okay.
But there's certainly indication-specific supplements I would recommend, right? So it comes down to everyone is different. So one that I always recommend, because there's really good evidence for it, doesn't get a lot of the limelight because it's quite cheap, is psyllium husk if you kind of have sluggish bowels. So having some psyllium husk starting with like a teaspoon in your porridge or something in the morning, increase your fluid, you know, 100 mils or so, and then work up. The clinical trials have used up to 3 tablespoons per day to help with constipation. Then if you are struggling with IBS, there is some good evidence for peppermint oil capsules to help kind of relax the gut. So it's called an antispasmodic type of chemical in these, which relaxes those muscles so you don't kind of get the cramping. And then we did touch on probiotics, where I wouldn't take a daily one, but if you know, have immune system's a little weak or cold and flu season, there's a specific one I take. You know, mums out there have got a baby who's got colic. Again, another really good area where there's good scientific evidence for one called BB12 is a type of strain. Vaginal microbiome, we touched on that if you're kind of not quite right down there. And then, of course, antibiotics, a specific probiotic for that. So, yeah, it's not a case of everyone needs to take everything. It's what's your situation and what you need to add in.
Amazing. So now my last question is, for the people out there that are super busy, their schedules are just packed, they're thinking, Super 6, there's no way I can fit that onto my plate. I'm just not one of those people, which is fine. Everybody's different. And they're just wondering, what advice would you have to those people who can't necessarily tick all of those boxes, but do want to make that change in a simple, easy way every day?
You know what? I'm going to say add in a can of legumes to your diet each day. I would never go a full can straight up because you'll get bloating, because it's kind of like teaching your gut or training your gut like at the gym, right? So these legumes are full of prebiotics. So there's those fertilizers which feed the microbiome. But the goal absolutely will be to have at least half a cup of these mixed legumes each day because they're so full of the prebiotics. And there's research out that shows that it adds extra years to your life. So you probably don't worry about it right now, but any of the older viewers might be thinking, actually longevity is really on my mind. So legumes are like this unspoken kind of superpower to have.
Amazing. That's so practical again. Thank you so much. I'm definitely going to be adding beans into my diet for sure. That's such a quick, easy fix. I love it. That does bring us to the end of this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please comment down below if you're watching on YouTube what you enjoyed and why. And once again, be sure to check out all of the links below where you can check out both of our links and what we're up to on socials. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, guys. I had an absolute ball.
Amazing, guys. I will see you same time next week on Wednesday for a brand new episode, and I hope you have a very, very happy 2025.